So the last two lessons we are doing that are going to be on your test are both absolute value lessons. This first one, and again, I'm hoping you remember this from Algebra 1. If not, that's okay. We're going to kind of start from scratch. This is just kind of the basics of absolute values. So the first thing is an absolute value, the actual definition, and you don't have to write this down because I'm one for actual definitions. I'm more for ones that you will remember. But the actual definition is the absolute value of something is the distance away from zero it is. So for instance, the absolute value of -6 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it's 6 steps from zero. So the absolute value of 6. Don't think that an absolute value makes a number into its opposite. People start to think, oh, okay, well, -6 is +6. Then the absolute value of +6 is -6. That's not right. Because again, remember, the definition is it's the number of steps away from zero your number is. So 6 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the absolute value of +6 is also +6. So I'm going to take a little second and interrupt myself right here and tell you, for me, the normal definition, the definition that you guys can tell people is, I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. It makes or keeps any number positive. Wow. So that's what most people say. People know absolute values make anything positive. Now, or keeps any number positive is the exact same thing I just said. A lot of people get pretty good at the absolute value of a negative as a positive, but then some people don't realize that the absolute value of a positive, it doesn't change at all. It just stays a positive. So it either makes it a positive, if it's already negative. If it's already a positive, it keeps it positive. So now going back, and I should split this up because I should format this a little bit differently. So number 3 is actually kind of the basis of all the things we're going to be doing today. So number 3, the absolute value of x is equal to 6. So what number could you put in there that would make that make sense? What number could you sub in for x and it would make positive 6? Number 6. Number 6. You could sub in a positive 6, which is what we did here. -6, like we did right here. That's the punchline of today. We're going to feed off to get a little bit more difficult with more solving. What are you putting here? If it's a positive, but it could also be a negative. So for almost every single answer you get today, you're going to end up with 2 answers: a positive answer and a negative answer. Again, a lot of people get confused because they say, well, wait a minute, Mr. Stephan, you said absolute values can't be negative. The value of a number is not negative, but I'm saying what you put into that. You can put whatever number you want into an absolute value. It could be positive, could be a decimal, could be a fraction. It doesn't make any difference. Any number that's in the absolute value is going to turn positive. And that is why, again, I can plug in -6. Just plugging that in, that's going to give you positive 6. What about number 4? This is another thing we're going to end on today. The chapter, what would I plug in to the absolute value of x to get -6? Any guesses? Yeah. Nothing. Exactly, because there's no numbers you would plug in that'll give you a negative answer with an absolute value. So if you ever have this, and we'll talk more about this later, that's your no solution for this lesson. No solution or a special case, but it does seem like the last several ones have. The next one we have, number 5, we have negative absolute value -2. So this is one, it doesn't show up a lot. This is a little bit different than the other ones we've done. But you can get a negative answer for these. So number 4, the absolute value is all by itself. Number 5, the absolute value of -2 is positive 2. But we still have this negative in front of that. So this answer, the absolute value of -2 turns to positive 2, but that negative turns it back into a -2. So yes, the absolute value will never give you a negative number. That's why absolute value of -2 turns to positive. But then that negative is going to turn it back into a negative. That absolute value is always going to be positive. Moving on, and I am thinking about taking this question off, but it is a little bit of, it's good practice to plug numbers in, especially those of you who are or should be checking your work. So first off, I almost put a lesson like this in chapter 0. I'm still pondering whether I should go back and put in a plugging numbers in lesson. But when you plug numbers in, I highly recommend always using parentheses. It seems like a lot of students, if they try to decide when they do and don't need parentheses, inevitably they're going to end up putting not putting parentheses when they need them. So for me, every time you plug anything in, I always use parentheses. So my W is -4, so in parentheses I put -4, -7, and plus 3, and then I plug in my Z. So -4 minus 7 is 7. 3 times. Now that everything inside the absolute is simplified, now we can actually do that absolute value. Value of -11 is +11. Absolute value of -18 is +18. Then we add those together. Is that your lunch bell? Okay. You getting into the good stuff. So again, make sure when you still do the order of operations, you simplify everything inside the absolute values, and then if there's a negative, you turn that to a positive. So the absolute value of -11 became +11, absolute value of -18 became +18, and then you just add those together. Okay. So moving on, I made these steps to solving these problems. The first step is to get the absolute value all by itself. These first several problems, you don't have to do that. That step is done for you. The absolute value is all by itself. And what I mean by that is if you look ahead, this one has a 10 that's not inside the absolute value, so you'd have to get rid of that first. That'd be your first step. Number 12 or number 13 has that 8. You have to get rid of that first before you do anything else. So the first step is to get the absolute value all by itself. Again, if you look at 7, 8, and 9, the absolute value is all by itself once it scrolls up and does away. There we go. So the first step is already done for some of these. The second step, you're splitting up your answer into 2 equations, or you're splitting up your one equation into 2 equations. You have a positive answer and a negative answer. That is where the absolute value, that's what it does, and that's where you can get rid of it. So just like we did up here, I'll remind you, just like we talked about on this one right here, where you could have this X in there, could be a +6 or a -6. There you go. Just like we talked about, that X in there could be a +6 or a -6, and you'll still get +6. So it could be either one of those, it could be both of those. So now the only difference is now instead of just having an X, we have a formula. We have a 7p minus 7. So that inside could be 77, and that would work. Or that inside part, 7p minus 7, could be -77. We have a positive answer and a negative answer. That's the only thing that changes. A couple people do this where they try to change this. They'll put this one as a positive and this one as a negative. That doesn't work. It's got to be an answer. Now, again, the reason we do that is some people get hung up on how absolute values can't have negatives. Yes, I understand that, but we're saying this part. This part in here, if it's +77, we're good. If it's -77, the absolute value makes positive, so we're good. So those are your 2 answers. So that's step 2. Step 3 is you're going to solve each equation. This is the part where, again, this is kind of the work of this one, but it shouldn't be too bad. We've been doing a lot of solving recently. So 77 plus 7 is 84, I believe. Divide both sides by 7, I get p is equal to 12. So that's one of your answers. And then you solve the other equation, same exact thing. Just be careful, because a lot of people think that, oh, if that one's +12, then the other one's got to be -12, because it's a -77. That's not the case. Sometimes it works that way, but not all the time. Most of the time it doesn't. So if you add 7 to this one, -77 plus 7 is -70. It is not -84. If you're not sure, that's where you need a calculator. -77 plus 7 is -70, not 84 like the last one. Then when you divide by 7, you get p is equal to negative 10. Now, my fourth step was to plug that answer back in. I'm taking that out. I should have erased this. Obviously, I would love if you plug your answer back in to double check, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the main reason I put that is this other part where it says check for extraneous solutions. As much as it pains me, I took that out this year. We're not going to talk about extraneous solutions. I don't think it's a standard, not an absolute value. I think it's radicals. But to save time, I cut that one out. So really, it's those 3 steps, and some of them you don't have to do the first step. So to plug those answers in, and again, I know some of you guys aren't going to plug your work in and double check. That's on you. But for some of you guys that really want to get an A+, to keep your 4.0, or for some of you guys that just need to get a 60% and pass and you're worried about it, take the extra 2 seconds to plug that in your calculator. 7 times 12 is 84. 84 minus 7 is 77. The absolute value 77 is 77. 7 times negative 10 is negative 70. Negative 70 minus 7 is negative 77. The absolute value of that is positive 77. I think you can even do, most of your calculators now do absolute values. So you can even type in just like you see it, absolute value 7 times 12 minus 7, and hit enter, and it should give you that 77. So I definitely encourage you guys to check your work. Sorry, I'm erasing that to give myself a little bit more room. So next one, same thing. The absolute value is already all by itself, so I'm going to split this into 2 equations. We have 6 minus 4x is equal to positive 14, and 6 minus 4x is equal to negative 14. Then from here you solve, and again, we just solved like normal. So hopefully, I'm not saying this is easy, but it should be getting easier. We've been doing a lot of this. Use a calculator if you need to, so you don't mess up like I almost did. X is equal to negative 2 for that one. Then the other one, color, minus 6, negative 4, x is equal to negative 20. Divide by negative 4, x is equal to positive 5. Most of these you will get 2 answers. Occasionally you get 1, and I'll give you an example at the end. I'll give you an example where you get 1 answer, but it's painfully obvious. It's not a special case. You have to like bend your mind around and remember it, and it's hard to think of. While you're solving, you'll realize very quickly you get 1 answer. It's really, you get the same answer twice. It's the same number. And last but not least, number 19. X plus 15 is equal to positive 6. X plus 15 is equal to negative 6. Sorry, I'm trying to fit that in there. Now, again, that's the step where you make your 2 equations. That's where you get rid of your absolute values. I've had students before that after that step, they still have absolute values, and it really confuses them. That's what the absolute value does. It makes 2 equations. It makes 2 scenarios. So that's where you can forget about your absolute values. 6 minus 15. Shouldn't have to use a calculator, but I'm going to because I certainly don't want to mess this up. Subtract 15 on the other side. X is equal to negative 21. So that one, we end up getting negative 9 and negative 21. Obviously, that doesn't happen all the time, but I wanted to make sure I put one in there like that because some students think that you should get a positive answer and a negative answer every time. I'd say probably most of them are like that, but certainly not all of them. So just make sure you're going slowly, make sure you're checking work if you need to. Okay. Go ahead and go over the next 2 problems on your own. If you don't have time to get to number 11, that's okay. I'll give you a little bit of time, and then I'll put the answer up here, but then we need to move on to the next thing. All right, my answers are both up there. Again, you should be getting 2 answers for just about all these. I'll show you an example later where you'll get 1 answer. But again, let's just say if you get 1 answer, you should certainly check your work because most of these are going to give you 2 answers. I'm okay. If you write your answer where you have x is equal to 1, x is equal to negative 5, like I did, you can put x is equal to 1 and negative 5. I don't care. One big thing that I want to make sure you don't do However your answer, do not put them in parentheses like an ordered pair because they are not an ordered pair. So I'm very lenient on how you give me your answer. Just don't write it like that because that does not mean the same thing. That means x is 1, y is -5, not that you have two x's. Any questions on that before we move on? So the next ones aren't too bad. It's just we have to do that first step. We have to get the absolute value all by itself first. Once we have the absolute value all by itself, then we solve it just like those other ones. I'm gonna, on the YouTube section, I'm gonna only have you guys do number 15, just to save a little bit of time because I do want to talk about those special cases and get your quizzes out to you. I'll start as soon as that is up there. Okay. So the biggest thing with these is you need to get the absolute value all by itself. You cannot touch any number inside the absolute value until it's the only thing left on the left or the right hand side. So it's very similar. You don't have to write this down, but it's very similar to x plus 10 is equal to 12, where before you do anything to get that, you have to subtract 10 from both sides. That's the exact same thing you're doing. You're getting that absolute value all by itself first, then you can get the two equations and you can solve that. Same thing with this 13 over here. It's almost the same as 3x plus 8, where you subtract 8 and then divide by 3. You have to do both of those before you get inside your absolute value, before you make your two equations. That's one of the biggest mistakes. Right away, people put positive 12 and negative 12, and you have to get that absolute value by itself first. So first thing you have to do is subtract 10. So if n minus 10 is equal to 12 minus 10 is 2. Now, since the absolute value is all by itself, now is where you can get your two equations. So we have n minus 10 is equal to positive 2, and minus 10 is equal to negative 2. And again, that's where you can, where you don't need your absolute values anymore. When you split up your equation, that gets rid of your absolute value. That cancels that. So I add 10, n is equal to 12. Sorry, that's a little sloppy. Add 10 over here. Again, don't get lured into thinking that it's negative 12. Negative 2 plus 10 is positive 8. So really, again, I'm never going to say that absolute values are easy. They're not easy. They take some work. But I will say the new stuff is easy. The stuff that's work is solving, and I'm hoping that's getting easier for you guys. But the absolute value part is pretty much remembering to get the absolute value by itself and then to split it up into two equations. Other than that, it's just solving like we've been doing. Which, again, I'm hoping that's getting easier. But I know not necessarily for everybody it's easy yet. We'll get there. So number 13, same thing. I can't do anything with that absolute value until I get it all by itself. So the first thing, I'm going to subtract 8. And again, I have students that struggle with this, and they don't know which one to do first. Definitely, again, just think of it as 3x plus 8. It's the same thing. It's the same order. Now, on this step, I know some, well, once it's written up there, oh, my computer's going slow today. So I subtract 8 from both sides. This next step, I know some people distribute the 3, so I have a 3p minus 30. I'm going to advise you not to do that. It does work sometimes, but it doesn't work all the time. So if you start doing that, that's fine, except for that eventually you'll do it one of the times that it doesn't work. So rather than doing that, once you get to this step, we're going to divide both sides by 3. So we end up with the absolute value of p minus 10 is equal to 17. And now the absolute value is all by itself, so now is where you can split that up. So I have p minus 10 is equal to positive 17. P minus 10 is equal to negative 17. Add 10 to both sides, we get 27 on the bottom. Add 10 to both sides on this one, you get negative 7. Sorry I didn't have enough room to show you that work, but you're just adding 10 to both sides on both of those. Use your calculator if you need to. All right, go ahead. If you haven't done number 15 yet, start on number 15. That's the one I'm going to show you guys. I'll give you a minute or two to get started on that, and then we'll go on to those special cases. All right, my answer up there. Again, with this one, it's a little bit longer because you have essentially a two-step equation before you can get to doing the absolute value. And then once you get the absolute value, you separate into two equations. This one, you do get a fraction or a decimal. If you wanted to make that into a decimal, that's fine. 10/8. So you could do negative 1.25. That's okay. I personally like decimals, but fractions are fine as well. Just per usual, either reduce your fraction or if you get a decimal, round it to two decimal places if you need to. Any questions on that one? All right. So the next part, this will not take very long because I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But these special cases. So as we've talked about, or as you probably are gathering, with these special cases, or with special cases, we have a lot of all real numbers and no solutions. We are not going to have all real numbers in this one, but we already alluded to some that are no solution. So for instance, number 16, the absolute value of 2x is equal to negative 6. That's already no solution because you can never have an absolute value that is equal to a negative. Your absolute value will always be positive. Now, I'm hoping you figure that out when you say, all right, so we have 2x is equal to negative 6 and 2x is equal to negative 6 or something. I'm hoping when you draw your two equations, you realize there's a negative here, you get confused, and that reminds you, you cannot have that at all. So you can never have an absolute value that's equal to a negative. So that is no solution. Now, the big thing with that does trick a lot of people, you have to do your step one first. Out of those three steps I gave you, you have to get the absolute value all by itself first. So for number 17, a lot of people think that they can do this one and they get their answer. But if you do the first step first, you subtract 11 from both sides, you get the absolute value of x minus 6 is equal to 9 minus 11 is what? Negative 2. Now the absolute value is equal to a negative, so that does not work. This is no solution. But you have to make sure you get it all by itself first like that. The exact opposite with number 18. A lot of people look at number 18 and they think it's no solution because it's equal to a negative. Well, the first step you need to do is get rid of that negative 3 in front. Since it is negative 3 multiplied by that, make sure you don't add 3 to both sides. It's negative 3 multiplied. When you divide by negative 3, now all of a sudden that makes that positive. X plus 3 is equal to positive 4, and that one you could solve. And I'm not going to go do that. I'm not going to take the time to do that. And again, number 19, I'm going to skip over this, but number 19 is the same idea. You just have to make sure you divide by negative 10. Make sure you're not adding 10 to both sides. That's the most common mistake on that one. And last but not least, number 20, we talked about this, but when you do two equations with this one, there's really no positive 0 and negative 0. If you want to make a negative 0, you can. But with this one, hopefully you realize that. And if you do make a negative 0, hopefully, I guess, negative 0 minus 10 should still be negative 10. And so you get one answer, you just get it twice, if that's the way you want to think of it. But again, that one I think is not really that hard to remember, because when you do your two equations, you can't have a negative 0. Hopefully that is a right flag for you guys. Uh-oh, someone